Another thing was we talked about the IPM technique of setting the bait. Fly the frame, allow the queen to build the drone brood frame, wax the cells, and then the queen will come along and lay the bait for the Varroa. And because of all the reasons we discussed, the extra length of time that drone brood take to develop, they will selectively lay their eggs there. And then you remove the whole thing in mass and tell them what you saw.
Yes, so in follow-up to our Belvedere meeting where we showed one of these not full, I had this in my hive. I used it last summer. I culled the drones. I put it back in. I let them build the frame. I left it in my hive after Varroa season and left it in for spring in anticipation of as soon as they started popping, I would take it out and hopefully get the spring load of the mites. And so what I have here is literally, if you look at this, and this has been in my freezer since this week, and I'm going to hand this around and let you look. You can see the bees are emerging. There's one here halfway out when I froze them. What I want you to look at in this, and we might, at the end of the day, after everybody's had a chance to take a peek at this, uncap and see what we have in here. Now, the larvae is frozen, so I picked at one of them and it broke. It's like a larvae ice cube. But we may be able to see what kind of mite load is in here. The problem with this is when you're doing the sampling, to the point of Charlie's comment, it's difficult to assess your mite load. Now, Bob talked about a percentage of bees, number of mites in the bucket. You could do a calculation. With the screen bottom board, they put thresholds, but there's so many differences for a screen bottom board for a mite threshold that you're really just looking, do I cross this one line? No matter what the conditions are, I need to treat. With this, you're culling them, but you really can't get a sample of how many are in here unless you want to count everyone. And I don't know what it's going to tell you. If you think about this, you put this under your hive for 24 hours and you pull it out. So many things matter as to how many mites fall on the board. How many bees do you have in the box? You could have one hive with X and you have the next hive sitting next to it with X times 2 amount of bees in it. Which one's going to drop more mites? You know, so you have, and what time of year is it, and all these other things. So when you look at that perspective, what they say is just reach a threshold, and once you reach that threshold, you're going to go ahead and treat. In the merit guide for the Mid-Atlantic, they say 50 mites on a board over a 24-hour period. If you attended the spring meeting, the master beekeeper, or the winter meeting, the master beekeeper, Landy Simone, had a conversation with Jennifer Berry about 50 mites might be okay in Mid-Atlantic or down in Georgia, but here in New Jersey, it'll wipe out a colony by the end of the year. You want to consider 30 mites. I called Landy because I had a question for her last night, and we had a conversation, and she said she's now down to 25 mites. And it's a different number depending on the year. I said it earlier, mites come early in the year when the bees ramp, and they come later in the year when you're in that July, August, September time frame for us in this part of New Jersey. In the spring, that number might be 10 or more on a board in 24 hours. When you have a natural mite drop, and let's talk about that. If you smoke a hive, the bees, the smoke is actually a acaricide or a mite deterrent, and it'll make those mites drop, just smoke in the hive. So they say when you want to take a mite drop, you should not be in your hive at all. Slide the board underneath. And if nobody's ever seen one of these, I brought the screen bottom board, which I showed earlier. It just has slots here. This is a standard one and has a pattern on it. You just slide it in. On this particular one that I did this week, I coated it with petroleum jelly or Vaseline by the brand name. I went out Thursday night, 8 o'clock, slid this underneath. I came out last night, 8 o'clock, pulled it out. 75 mites on this board in hive number 1 for me. What does that mean? Treat. That's high. Time to treat. So I'm looking forward to Charlie telling us how to use Mite Away quick straps, because I have honey supers on my hive right now. I'm going to pass this around. I would say hold on to the corners. If you look, you'll see more than the mites. You'll see them through here, and they're pretty obvious. They're the brown specks. They're almost round. They're pointed on one end, and I'm going to pass that around. So when you're using a mite board like that, you're looking for 25 to 30 mites in New Jersey, according to what Landy Simone told me, at this time of year. And the mite drop, the natural mite drop, might vary across days. So when you go on the internet and you look at how people do this, sometimes they say you want to put one underneath, leave it under for 3 days, and then divide the number of mites by 3. Some say you put it under one hive one day, one hive another day, another hive another day, and you'll figure out what the mite load is in your apiary. To each his own. Again, 10 questions to beekeepers and 20 answers. I would suggest, or it has been said, that this is the best way to do it. And the reason, in case it wasn't clear, if you don't want to count every grid, you can only count half of them and multiply it by 2. You'll get a statistical sampling. So, how many people use these? Show of hands. How many people use Sugar Shake? I like Sugar Shake because I think it's just simpler to put the bees back. This is non-invasive at all. Has no impact whatsoever to the bees, other than you have a cover underneath for a period of time. They're not getting the ventilation that they're used to.
You didn't use sugar, powdered sugar to do the mite count?
Do you use powdered sugar? So that's a good point. I said before you could use it at caricide. Some beekeepers will tell you that you should put thymol or something in there, and those things will enhance the mite drop and tell you what your mite load problem is. Or you could do it the natural way and just do nothing and let it go that way. It's your preference. I would say you could go look. There was a great article, I think Bob pointed me to, scientificbeekeeping.com. They had a good article describing. I personally would think you should just do the natural one, but to your point, you can sugar. The problem with sugar and things like that, when you sugar the bees and they do the natural drop, you got sugar on the board and you have to sift through it. Some people will actually scrape the debris off the board and wash it, and then try and see if the mites float and do the count. It makes it one more step and a little more difficult. Right? So from that perspective, yes, you can use sugar. Now, they will tell you when you sugar the bees that you get the biggest drop over a period of time, and then within 24 hours that drop goes down, and within 3 days it goes down, and that sugar is only effective on the bees for a period of time, and then you have to do it again. So the one thing I will tell you, take your mite load, do your treatment, and then check your mites again. Keep checking. Don't give up. Get it under that threshold. If you do one treat and walk away, you may not potentially be doing it. The other thing, as we talked about, is break the cycle. You know, if a hive swarms, they take mites with them and they break the cycle. In Europe, sometimes they take the queen and they put it in a queen cage so she can't lay, so there's a period of brood that doesn't happen, and it breaks the cycle. In this case, you're going to want to continue to monitor your mite when you have a problem and get it down. And I know, Bob, you struggled last year. You kept going and going and going to get that mite down. And Landy told me she sampled yesterday or this week. She has some hives that have 3 or 4, and she have other ones that have 200. And there's no rhyme or reason. She also wanted me to share this with everybody. She checked her mites in the spring. Good. Checked the mites in the fall. Good. Put everybody to bed. Thought everything was going to go well. And then what happened is she lost colonies over winter to mites. At the end, when she lost her colonies, she took the bees, cups full, sent them down to get analyzed, and they came back to her and said, Varroa. And she's trying to rationalize how that happened, and she couldn't quite conceptualize it until it dawned on her that at the end of the season, we had a funny fall last year. Remember, it was warm right up through to December. quarter-mile away from her is a beekeeper who has a lot of hives and doesn't treat. Lost a lot of colonies, and she suspects that her hives went and dropped their stuff out and brought the mite load back in the late season. That brings a new paradigm for us. If you have that type of situation, you may need to be checking your mites more than just those threshold times. So I want to pass this around. There's a little surprise in the bottom of the pack. In the top up here are uncapped larvae, and when you look at them, there are mites on them. I thought that was the coolest thing. When I looked, you'll see on this side of the frame, these two have mites that crawled in and were waiting to get capped. And you also see the bees that are emerging. So I think it's a good time, Charlie, to take a break, and I'll pass this around and put it out. If anybody wants to take a look at it, you can come look in the bucket. And what do we have next? By the way, quick strips?
No, we got splits next. Now, you know, family planning, okay?
Family planning. So I'll start over here with this. Sorry, these are a little sticky. And thank Roger, he built that frame.